Bernard L. Madoff built a reputation that felt almost unbreakable. In the early decades of his career, he presented himself as a disciplined market professional, calm, connected, and consistent. He founded a legitimate brokerage business and became known for handling large volumes of trades. Over time, that real-world credibility became the most valuable asset behind everything that followed. As his name grew, so did the social proof around him. He moved comfortably among wealthy families, philanthropic circles, and professional networks that relied heavily on trust. People often described his results with one word that sounded reassuring: steady. In markets that rise and fall, steady returns feel like safety. And when fear shows up, safety becomes a product people will pay almost anything for. Behind the scenes, Madoff cultivated the image of exclusivity. Access to his investment operation was framed as selective, almost like a private club. That idea triggers a powerful bias. If something is hard to get, it must be valuable. Investors weren't just buying performance, they were buying belonging. In many cases, referrals came through friends, respected community members, or financial intermediaries, making the decision feel less like a risky bet and more like joining a trusted circle. This is where the educational lesson begins. Many large financial deceptions don't start with flashy promises. They start with credibility, familiarity, and an emotional story that makes people stop asking hard questions. Madoff's public persona did not need loud marketing. His marketing was reputation, silence, and the quiet confidence of people saying, "He's the real deal." The scheme's core illusion was consistency, returns that appeared smooth even when markets were turbulent. That smoothness can be a warning sign because genuine markets typically leave fingerprints, periods of lower performance, volatility, and imperfect timing. When an investment story looks too neat, it may be engineered to look that way. In this first phase, the operation benefited from a simple human pattern. Once respected people believe something, others follow. Due diligence often becomes trust by association. The audience takeaway is not that trust is bad, but that trust must be paired with verification, especially when money, status, and social pressure all push in the same direction. A key part of the Madoff narrative was the strategy he claimed to use, often described as a split-strike conversion. On the surface, it sounded like a careful plan designed to reduce risk, buy large, stable stocks, and use options to manage ups and downs. For many investors, that explanation was enough. It sounded technical, plausible, and sophisticated. But the deeper educational point is this: complexity can be used as a shield. When a strategy is hard to understand, people may hesitate to challenge it. They don't want to look uninformed. And when the manager appears confident, investors may interpret their own confusion as proof that the manager is smarter rather than a signal to slow down. As assets grew, the operation relied on layered relationships. Many investors did not place money with Madoff directly. They invested through feeder funds, intermediaries that pooled money and sent it into Madoff's operation. For investors, this felt like an added layer of safety. Someone professional checked him. Yet that same structure also diluted responsibility. When many parties benefit from fees and reputation, the incentive to ask uncomfortable questions can quietly weaken. Another crucial dynamic, reporting. Investors received statements showing trades, positions, and gains. A statement feels official. It arrives on paper with numbers, dates, and neat formatting. People often treat statements as reality, even though statements are only as truthful as the system that generates them. Education-focused analysis here centers on verification. If a strategy is real, there should be independent signals that confirm it. Custody at a credible third party, audits that withstand scrutiny, and trade activity that can be reconciled. When too much of the process is in-house, the investor's view becomes a single-camera movie controlled by the same storyteller. Madoff's operation also leaned on consistency in communication. He did not behave like a frantic salesman. He behaved like a quiet gatekeeper. That style can disarm skepticism. If someone isn't pushing you, you assume they don't need to. But calmness is not evidence. Calmness is simply a style. The warning signs, in hindsight, often sounded subtle. Returns that didn't match market patterns, limited transparency, and an environment where questions were politely discouraged. A major lesson for any listener is this: a believable story plus social proof can override rational caution. The antidote is a checklist mindset, independent custody, independent auditing, and clear, testable explanations. Long before the collapse, the Madoff story attracted skepticism from some professionals who found the numbers hard to reconcile with real market behavior. Among the most cited critics was Harry Markopolos, who raised concerns that the claimed results in trading volume did not align logically. The important educational element is not the personality of any critic, but the pattern. In large financial deceptions, warning signals often exist. They simply struggle to compete with reputation. Why do red flags get ignored? First, there is authority bias. If someone holds a prestigious position or has a long-standing name, people assume they must be trustworthy. Second, there is group reinforcement. When many investors are satisfied, especially influential ones, skepticism can feel like negativity rather than prudence. Third, there is incentive conflict. Intermediaries earning fees may not feel motivated to disrupt a profitable relationship. Madoff's operation benefited from a structure in which the same ecosystem that could have challenged it also gained from it. Investors believed they were protected by layers of professionalism, but those layers sometimes worked like insulation that kept uncomfortable information from traveling. There were also structural red flags. The separation or lack of separation between advisory functions and custody, the reliance on a small, closely controlled back office, and the limited ability for outsiders to independently verify trades. Even without dramatic language, these details matter because they illustrate how trust can be engineered. A deception does not need loud theatrics. It needs control over records and just enough credibility to prevent deep inspection. In educational terms, this is a lesson about information bottlenecks. If all confirmation comes from one place, one firm, one set of statements, one insider narrative, risk increases sharply. Healthy financial systems prefer multiple independent checkpoints. Another human factor is the fear of missing out, expressed quietly rather than loudly. When an investment seems stable and others appear to benefit, people fear being the one who stayed outside. That emotional pressure can reduce the willingness to ask basic questions like who holds the assets? Who audits the books? Can trades be reconciled independently? The best takeaway for the audience is practical. Skepticism is not cynicism. It's an act of protection. When someone invites you into a special opportunity, the right response is not excitement first, it's verification first. Not because everyone is dishonest, but because trust without evidence can become a blind spot. When financial markets tightened during the 2008 crisis, many investors needed cash. Redemptions increased. In a normal investment operation, redemptions are funded by selling assets or using available liquidity. But if assets are not actually there in the stated form, redemptions become a pressure test the story cannot pass. This is a key point in understanding why many large financial deceptions collapse during broader downturns. In good times, new money and investor confidence can keep the system appearing stable. In stress times, the demand for liquidity exposes whether the underlying structure is real. Reports later described how Madoff told close family members that the operation was not what it seemed. The educational angle here is about fragility. A structure built on false reporting is not merely risky, it is inherently unstable. It can look strong for years, even decades, but it is sensitive to shifts in investor behavior. Once the truth emerged, the scale shocked many communities because the investors were diverse: individuals, charities, foundations, and institutions. Some had placed life savings, others had allocated endowment funds meant to support long-term missions. The emotional harm was not only financial, it included broken trust within social circles, friends who introduced friends, respected leaders who recommended the opportunity, and families who assumed safety because everyone smart is in it. From an educational standpoint, this phase teaches that fraud is often a network event. It spreads through relationships. That's why due diligence must be independent. Your friend may be honest, but your friend may be relying on someone else's reassurance. The crisis moment also highlights the importance of basic financial literacy, understanding how returns are generated, what volatility looks like in real markets, and how custody and auditing work. The more an investor understands these fundamentals, the harder it becomes for a too smooth story to feel normal. The listener takeaway is not never invest, it is invest with verification. A downturn doesn't create deception, it reveals it. Liquidity demands, transparency requirements, and independent checks act like sunlight. When sunlight arrives, engineered certainty often fades. Following the collapse, Madoff was arrested and later sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The legal system moved to unwind the damage through investigations, asset recovery efforts, and lawsuits involving institutions and intermediaries connected to the flow of funds. For many victims, the legal story became a second long journey, complex, procedural, and emotionally draining. A major recovery mechanism involved tracing money flows and attempting to return funds where possible. This included the work of a court-appointed trustee for the brokerage liquidation and other legal processes tied to victim compensation. The core educational insight is that recovery after a large financial deception is rarely quick. It can take years, and the outcomes often depend on documentation, timelines, and where funds traveled. Another difficult concept emerged in public discussions: clawbacks, where some investors who withdrew more than they invested, sometimes without knowing anything was wrong, could be required to return profits. This is not about blaming ordinary people. It reflects how courts may attempt to treat all victims fairly when the pool of available assets is limited. Educationally, it underscores that apparent profits from a fraudulent system may not be secure, even for those who believed everything was legitimate. The aftermath also exposed the role of gatekeepers, auditors, custodians, financial institutions, and feeder funds. The public asked why basic controls did not stop the scheme sooner. That question matters because it shapes policy, enforcement practices, and industry standards. But it also matters for individual investors. Do not assume that someone else checked. Confirm who checked, how they checked, and whether they were truly independent. For charities and nonprofits, the consequences were especially painful because funds often supported programs, grants, and community services. The broader lesson is that mission-driven organizations need the same level of financial oversight as any professional investor, sometimes more, because the money represents future commitments to others. The listener takeaway is a practical framework. Diversify custody risk, insist on independent audits, validate third-party oversight, and avoid systems where one person or one firm controls every critical step. If transparency feels like an inconvenience to the manager, that discomfort is itself information. The Madoff story is often summarized as a Ponzi scheme, but the most useful educational approach is to treat it as a case study in human behavior, incentives, and controls. The operational trick was not only financial, it was psychological. It used trust, reputation, and social networks to reduce skepticism. The first lesson is about return patterns. Real investing usually comes with visible trade-offs: risk, volatility, and imperfect timing. When returns look unusually consistent across different market conditions, that deserves deeper verification. Consistency is not automatically suspicious, but it should trigger questions. What is the strategy? What are the risks? Where is independent evidence? The second lesson is about custody and independence. If the same organization advises, executes, and reports, the investor is relying on one storyteller. Healthy systems distribute responsibilities across independent parties. A reputable custodian holds assets. An independent auditor verifies books, and reporting can be reconciled with external records. The third lesson is about exclusivity marketing. When access is framed as a privilege, people may rush to qualify rather than pause to verify. A safe rule: any legitimate manager should welcome reasonable transparency. If you feel subtly discouraged from asking questions, treat that as a serious signal. The fourth lesson is about social proof and referrals. A trusted friend can introduce you to an opportunity, but that does not replace due diligence. The phrase, "everyone I respect is in it," is not evidence. Evidence is documentation, independent oversight, and verifiable operations. The fifth lesson is emotional. Avoid shame. Many intelligent people were affected. Financial deception often targets normal human strengths, trust, community, and optimism. The best protection is a calm checklist, not fear. Verify the basics, seek independent confirmation, and diversify risk so that no single story can become your entire financial future. In the end, the Madoff case teaches a balanced mindset. Be open to opportunity, but never outsource your skepticism. Trust is valuable. Verification is essential.